welcome to the Leadership Podcast. We'll welcome you in tonight. I am Brett Miller, your host for this evening. I've also got our co-host here, Thea Ali, Will Atkins, and Dion Dixon. This is the conversations that we're going to have tonight, where hopefully our disagreements inform your decisions. So tonight we're going to be talking about the rise of political violence. Now, just kind of as a precursor to this, what I want to sort of start off with here is that personally, I think violence in the name of politics has no place in a free republic, but it is rising. So it's something that we definitely need to talk about. And the thing is, it's coming across from the entire political spectrum. We're seeing it in a lot of different areas. So if we're serious about unity and truth, and what this podcast represents is being able to have these conversations in a civil sense, we have to be willing to confront all forms of political violence, not just the ones that fit our narrative. So we're going to run through that tonight. We're going to discuss this, and we're going to sort of see where this goes. I'm interested in the conversation. Hopefully you guys will follow along. Of course, like, subscribe, share with your friends. But let's go ahead and kick this off. So Dion, how about you start us off tonight?
All right. So I will bring up, we are recording this only a couple of days after our nation's 249th birthday. And I will say that that is probably one of the acceptable forms of political violence. In that we now live in the freest country in the world. It may be flawed. We may not be perfect, but every year around this time, I definitely like to reflect on how blessed we are to live in this place where, for instance, the four of us can have this discussion out in the open. We can post it onto the public internet, and we are not arrested for our political views. So that's a good thing. And the political violence that led to the creation of this country is something that I can condone.
But we all will not condone political violence like we have seen lately, right?
Correct.
For sure.
Okay. So, and the only, Dion, the difficulty that I have is when people, because I mean, I agree, right? Like, we conducted political violence to start this country. We committed treason to start this country. And, we won. So it worked out for us in the end, but, that wasn't assured. We very likely could have lost as well.
To be fair, we did ask for a redress of grievances multiple times from King George III before we outright declared independence. And even in the Declaration of Independence, we didn't actually say we want to go to war with you. We just said we want to be left alone. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, and, but I see people, when we look at the political violence that's going on today, they call back to the American Revolution, and they're like, well, yeah, sometimes you got to kill some people to make things right. And I think that's the part that I have a little bit of issue with, like using the American Revolution as an excuse to kill people for political reasons.
And I guess my issue is also, like, I do think that there's a line to be drawn between what would be referred to as political violence and then like actual rebellion and or a war. And so I guess when I think of the revolution, the Revolutionary War, for in the United States, or even the Civil War, I think those were much larger organized events that also where you had people like Will just mentioned, where there was at least initial steps to try to go through, a judicial process or a governmental process before, violence ensued. And I don't necessarily think that's what we're seeing in the current day form, right? So, and that's where I think we draw the line, especially if I would recommend that our conversation be limited to the United States, because I also think a lot of times when people are talking about political violence, they try to compare people who commit acts in the U.S. versus other parts of the world that have very different government structures. So, their options are different than what U.S. citizens' option or U.S. people in America, because I won't limit it political violence to U.S. citizens in the U.S. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
But I do think that's where I have a hard time, because I think quite often what we're not seeing the person or people who have tried to engage within the system and failed, and then they're resorting to some type of violence. What we're seeing is, these lone actors, or people who are inspired, and then they take on themselves to just act out in these violent ways against people, right? And so you look at what's the guy? For some reason, my brain will not commit this guy to memory. The one who shot the CEO in New York, the
Luigi Mangione, is that right?
Mangione, yeah, right. So
Yeah.
I guess that's an example where, and the reason I call that political violence, even though he didn't attack this, an individual who was an elected official per se, his, from what we understand, his reasoning behind committing that act was, cause, and it was tied to healthcare in America, and that is, obviously a very politically fraught issue. And then also not just that
And he had
his
a
motivation.
manifesto when he
Yes.
was caught, when he was apprehended. He
Yeah.
had a political manifesto in his backpack.
Yeah. And I think also this is where I think it opens up our discussion. I'll start with him, because I obviously will have harsh words for other actors, but I didn't like the thing that bothered me in that particular instance, because his values, or the issue that he was raising attention to, tended to align with the left, right? And issues that people on the left, have brought up over time. I found it very hypocritical that there were people on the left that are very, very critical of gun violence in the context of other instances, that kind of made light of Mangiano's acts, or focused on the fact that he was good looking and all these other things, as if to like dehumanize his victim, or the fact that his victim was someone who we might look at and say, wasn't the best person. But in America, you don't have to be a good person to be able to not be gunned down in the streets. You know what I mean? And so that was one instance that kind of made me go,
Yeah, and I definitely noticed the hypocrisy there. I wrote down a couple of quotes that I saw on social media. One person said, "This needs to be the new norm," as in, like, rich white people need to be afraid for their lives in this country now.
Mhm.
Somebody else said, "Eat the rich," but then. I don't know if you guys remember that he had 3D printed at least part of his pistol that he
Mhm.
used. And so, like, I was seeing the same accounts on social media both praise what he did, and then like say we have to crack down on like 3D printed parts for guns, and we need more gun control and all that stuff. And I was like, that's a little bit hypocritical, isn't it? But
Yeah. I mean, the thing that was interesting when you talk about eat the rich, one of the things, and I'm sure you picked up on this at that particular case, Dion, was his silencer. Like the first time I saw, I heard the stories of like his weapon and like what he used. I was like, that costs a lot of money. That's an expensive weapon that he used. So it made me immediately start to question, well, who is this person that seems to be championing the cause of the people? But it sounds like that person, that he himself had money, and then we would learn that he did come from extreme privilege. But I always thought that was interesting. Like literally yesterday, I was getting in my car, and I was in a parking lot, and there was this girl, and she had the Eat the Rich t-shirt on, and she proceeded to get into a Mercedes G-Wagon, and I almost took a picture. I was like, honey.
Nice. Nice.
But
to be
what is
fair, in
happening
the
here?
city that you live in, a G-Wagon is kind of like middle of the road, right?
I mean,
it's not like she
no.
got into a Bentley.
Yeah, but either way, like I was like, girlfriend, like that is a 6-figure car, right? Like, what are you doing? I just thought that was very like a moment where I was like, if I wouldn't have had to be so obvious to try to take a picture of her, I was like, oh wow, that's again the hypocrisy of it all. But yeah, I mean that's the thing. Jon Stewart had, this was 2 weeks ago after the shooting in Minnesota. Do any of you guys watch The Daily Show?
No, I see clips every once in a while.
I guess I should have probably put in the chat for us to all watch that probably before this discussion. Will, did you see the episode where, because Jon Stewart's only on Mondays?
One, no.
So he really, I thought, had basically the reaction that is our conversation today. You know, he pointed out that now whenever one of these acts happens, the first thing people seem to want to do is figure out whose team the offender was on or whose team the victim was on. And then it becomes about, you know, then that changes how you respond. And he pointed out like how ridiculous that is. And, you know, he basically was like, I don't give excuse my language, like, I don't give a fuck why you do these things, like why somebody would do this. And our conversation can't just be about what motivated the person to do it and then try to justify it based on whether they're on your team or not, you know? And I guess my question for you guys is like, I still remember a time when it wasn't that way. Like even when Gabby Giffords when she was shot, I don't remember that being the instant reaction. You know, I remember everybody seeming to universally just be like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. And here we are years later. And, you know, fortunately she survived. But now in this instance, people died. And there was still this like hesitation to just condemn the act. You know what I mean? And even in that instance, Trump, you know, President Trump, this was one time I was really disappointed because he didn't have to take this road when they asked if he was going to call the governor. All he could talk about was his dislike for him as a politician, you know, I guess because he ran, you know, on the opposite ticket. But it was like, okay, in this moment, you know, so that's one of those things where like, how did we get here? I mean, what are your guys' thoughts of like how we got here as far as that, the difference between like a Giffords and where we are now?
Personally, I think there's been a lot of shift. And there's a lot of things that kind of factor into this. And this last 10 years, we have seen this drive towards creating an us versus them mentality when it comes to politics. And so there's just, again, you're talking about playing teams where everybody's kind of there. But I think another thing that's really kind of driven I don't know, not necessarily the violence, but maybe the acceptance of it. Yeah, is a lot of the social media platforms, the online communities where you can kind of gather with others, so to speak, that think like you think. Whereas in normal conversation, this isn't stuff you talk about in the open, right? When you're on board with this kind of violence. So it's not like it's going to be workplace chatter. You're not going to do this at the water cooler. You're not going to be talking about this stuff at dinner when you're out with friends. But you have these online platforms where people can kind of hide behind the anonymity of it and the groups that are there, and they can feed into it. So you have a little bit of social contagion that really plays into it. But I think a lot of that is leading to, I don't know, a dehumanizing rhetoric that we're kind of getting, and it's coming from both sides, you know. And again, that's been one of my issues in politics in general, is we keep getting away from the idea of people and, you know, no longer seeing people for the value that they are and how special people truly are. We kind of get away from this sanctity of life. But, you know, in addition to that, this is also, we've talked about this before, but the constant drive that we see with the media, that it's extremely biased. You'll see this in different things where you'll see certain violent acts on TV. It's reframed as, oh, it's just a protest that went a little bad. Versus you might have a similar violent act on the other side of the political spectrum, and it's emphasized as terrorism. And so just that media
example. Can you give an example of that? Because I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying, but I want to be more specific to it. I'd like to understand.
My favorite was when CNN, I think it was CNN, or maybe it was NBC, where the guy was standing right in front of the burning building saying, this is mostly peaceful protests, back in 2020. And it reminded me of Baghdad Bob. Remember when he was like, there are no American troops here. And they were like driving tanks right past him, behind him. Things like that, I think, you know, kind of discredit the mainstream media when we see things like that.
I guess my question is, because like, I hear this like idea that the media somehow is so biased. And number one, I think we should be past the point of saying that Fox News is not the mainstream media, right? Like, however we're defining the mainstream media, I think it's not accurate, right? When you look at like the main viewerships of some of these cable news programs, Fox is continuously at the top, right? So it's not like it's this
Yeah,
like
and they're biased
startup.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's my point. So when we say mainstream media, we're not just talking about CNN or
No.
NBC, ABC, CBS, but because of that, the bias is it's not always going to be towards the right. You know what I mean? Or towards the left or to the right. So I guess I always think whenever people talk about the mainstream media being biased, it always seems to be the discussion is that the bias is in favor of Democrats or liberal perspectives and against conservatives. And that's just, to me, not accurate anymore when you talk about the amount of people that are viewing and engaging with right-wing media. Like I had a conversation with someone recently about when we were talking about established Democrats. And I think a lot of I listened to crooked media, and a lot of like folks that came out of like the Obama era, they still look at the established Democratic Party as being someone other than them, and like the old people in the room as someone other than them. And it's like, newsflash, like you're you're it, you are the established Democrats. And I think the same is true when we talk about the media, and that's the only reason I'm like, give me an example of what
I'll
you're
give you an
talking about.
example that's not directly related to this, but is very recent here in DC. So how many of you actually heard on the media, on the mainstream media, that the military parade that just happened here in DC about a month ago was actually requested by the US Army in June of last year when President Biden was still in office, and approved in July of last year by President Biden's administration?
I heard that there was supposed to be I did hear that, but I heard it from the perspective of the Army was planning whatever the anniversary parade.
Yeah,
But then
250th anniversary of the
yeah,
Army. Yeah.
but then
But
the planning for it evolved and changed in the wake of
yeah, so
Trump.
like everybody that I've talked to heard, oh, this was President Trump's, birthday party parade and everything, and that's how it was sold on the media. And like even Fox News, who usually comes to Donald Trump's defense, I never heard them talk about how this was all planned. At least the initial planning of it was started under Biden, and it was all approved under that. So the fact that it became like, I just think that it does reveal a little bit of, they want to tell a certain story. And I think, for our audience that's now listening or watching this and go like, where is this going? I think this does feed into this whole us versus them and political violence thing. I had it in my notes that the sort of the ratcheting up of the political rhetoric and vitriol that we have is definitely a contributor. And Thea, you had mentioned that Jon Stewart said, like, I don't care what team you're on, and I don't care why you said you did this, because you just killed a man. And while I do agree with that, right? Like, I mean, you just murdered a person. I kind of don't really care why. That's a heinous act. At the same time, if we can get to the root reasons of why people are doing these things, there might be a solution there to help us tamp it down.
Yeah, yes and no. I agree with. I think it's I think I agree with you. If you're actually like wanting to look at how do we stop this, then, and you're engaging with it from that perspective, then understanding why. But I guess what his point was, which I would agree with, is I don't think most people, when they want to know why, they're not looking at it from the perspective of, let's understand how we prevent this moving forward. It's more of like, how angry should I be at the shooter and then how should I feel about the victim, based on, so like with the Mangione situation, it gave people an excuse to not feel empathy for the victim because he was portrayed in this negative light. And then it also gave people the ability to kind of empathize, with the shooter, in a way that I'm just sitting there like, okay, no, I no. That was still somebody's husband and father that is no longer here, and that violence, I don't. We shouldn't make light of it, but I get where you're coming from, Dion.
I was wondering, speaking of shootings, I was wondering how the two of you felt, and Brett, you too, but largely I'm wondering how the two Democrats felt when you heard or saw on national TV that Trump had been shot last summer.
Yeah, I mean, and that gets to, like, it doesn't matter who did it towards who, like, and especially, I mean, it's a little, as someone who was running for office myself, like, political violence has no place, and it doesn't matter who it's towards or against. And the other thing I wanted to mention, though, like, we keep saying political violence, and Brett, you had kind of touched on it earlier, like, if you're conducting violence for political reasons, it's called terrorism. And we have this, I don't know, like, there's a taboo maybe for calling things domestic terrorism, and I don't see, I guess I don't understand why, as long as it's being equally applied. Like, if you're conducting violence for political reasons, that's terrorism.
I think because people don't want to associate terrorism with their team. Right. So I think in the 90s, when you had like Timothy McVeigh, I'll just use him because I think he's a non-controversial in labeling him as a domestic terrorist. I think I don't think people saw him as necessarily being on their team, like what he represented at that time in history, even though there may be things that people kind of may have agreed with him on as far as like gun rights and whatnot. I don't think they thought that he was representative of like the main, like, I don't want to say mainstream, but like of what they believed or their identity as far as their political identities are concerned. Now, some of these shooters do represent like a larger viewpoint, right? And so to call them a terrorist would mean that my side is breeding or radicalizing terrorists. And I think that's an uncomfortable conversation and realization for people to have. Right, that someone who believes what you believed and then they took it to the next step and became a terrorist. It's I think it hits too close to home for people.
And I think
Thea,
that's
what were your thoughts?
Like, Mangione was a terrorist.
Yeah, he is a terrorist. Yes, I agree. My thoughts when Trump was shot, my immediate thought was relief that he survived. Because I just didn't want him to become. I just didn't want us to have that like ugly stain of an American president being killed. And for whatever, it's no secret I'm not like a Trump supporter, but I still believe in like the importance of the office of the presidency. And I think that Trump deserves the same level of respect as someone who's held that office, who was running for that office. And I just could feel like a part of our soul as America would have been diminished had he died. Right. So I remember just feeling relief, like, thank God he's not more grievously injured and that he survived. And then being angry when I thought it could be somebody who was to the left. I remember being like angry because I'm like, damn it, we're never going to hear the end of it if this is what I think it is. Like, I was just resentful that then I might have to defend somebody who had done this, And then my third one was, I was relieved when I found out that this person definitely didn't seem to be liberal and didn't seem to have any type of progressive agenda. Then I was relieved because then it took the conversation out of, oh, you see, the liberals are out to get us, right? And so I was relieved again. So yeah, that was kind of my roller coaster of emotions.
What about you,
I don't
Brett?
know. How did you guys
what were you
feel?
thinking?
I mean, for me, it's kind of the same thing, right? To where, any shooting in that instance, the first thought is thankfully they survived, right? And then I think for me, it's just more, again, the political climate, just being upset at the fact that, like, how did we get here? Why are we thinking that this is okay? And obviously this is not the first time in history, presidents have attempted to have been assassinated and some have been assassinated, right? That we understand that has happened, but it never makes it okay. And this is the point that I was kind of getting to earlier with stuff. And we kind of got derailed on the media side of things. And for me, it wasn't a left or right media thing. It was media in general, right? Just having that bias and pushing that bias, because when we get to the point, because it's the people and the response, right? Because, Dion, you're mentioning, we've got the United Healthcare CEO being shot, and then we've got President Trump being shot at. The responses that you saw from the people, the extreme views that people are like, I can't believe they missed Trump, like things like that, or they're praising that this guy's being shot. Like, that shows a severe heart issue with the people. And that's what I was talking about, where we have both the media and the politicians, that they keep using this language that escalates this stuff and just drives more division between us. Because when we're constantly looking at these acts and we're talking about them and we're judging them based on the ideology behind them and saying, well, one ideology is good and one ideology is bad, that's just a dangerous place to be, right? And of course, when you've got the political leaders that are demonizing their opponents, what tends to happen is the unstable people listen to that, right? And that's where, Thea, you said, we start getting these lone wolves that pop up and they just kind of take this into their own hands and start doing stuff. Because we've seen a massive rise in that trend, since probably 2010, so last 15 so years, that it's been a lot more of the lone wolf type stuff than it is organized groups trying to move a political agenda forward. So anyway, I know that was a lot that was in that, but
and here's I'm gonna push back a little bit, and I'm not trying to be an ass, and I recognize my bias. When we talk about, Brett, you had said earlier that this is coming from both sides, and I'll give you that both sides have participated. My understanding, my belief, though, is that a lot of this is like an order of magnitude greater, and I wouldn't even put Republicans in the mix. I would say from Trump himself. And there is a part of me when the attempt on Trump's life was made. I mean, that was a fellow Republican that tried to assassinate him. And I'm not going to lie. There's a part of me that was like, what did you think was going to happen when you create this vitriol, when you dehumanize people the way that you do? There's a part of me that was like, I mean, a lot of this, in my opinion, you say 2010, I think 2015, 2016, I recognizing that I'm biased, I think a lot of it stems from Trump himself. And that's the part that I struggle with is, I recognize that Democrats are I don't want to say just as guilty, but I mean, yeah, Democrats do this as well.
I would ask the question, if any of us were given the opportunity in 1938 to take out Adolf Hitler, would we turn down the opportunity? And I bring that up because a lot of the media.
Wait,
right?
Knowing what we know
Yeah,
now,
knowing what we know now.
Knowing what we know now,
Yeah.
not what we would have known in 1938. So
Right.
what's the
No,
point
I'm
of that
saying,
argument?
like, somebody gives you a time machine and a rifle and says you have the opportunity to take out Adolf Hitler in 1938, knowing everything that he was going to do. I think we would all be like, yeah, I'm going to take that guy out. Now, a lot of the media called Trump the next Hitler. And so I'm not saying it's right, but I could see where somebody who is not necessarily completely mentally stable would go, well, who wouldn't want to take out Hitler, right? I don't want us to turn into Third Reich, And so I think this plays into the whole. Yeah, is Trump vitriolic himself? Absolutely.
Actually, I will push back when we say the media, because I don't think it's the media. Well, okay, if we want to talk about the Hitler reference, one of the most famous people to refer to Trump as the next Hitler was J.D. Vance, right? So a lot of the elected officials have adopted this language, and then it's just amplified by the media, right? It's like it becomes that sound chamber. But a lot of times when we're talking about the media, we're saying them giving a platform to certain prominent individuals to make these different types of comments, right? And I agree with Brett not Brett, I'm sorry. I agree with Will in saying I do think Trump uniquely holds some responsibility for changing the tone of our conversation when it comes to how you refer to the other side and how you speak about these incidents. Him making all the jokes about Nancy Pelosi's husband being shot or being attacked in their home. Oh, how's her husband doing? Ha ha ha. Isn't that funny? You're not going to find a clip of George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton making those types of jokes about their political adversaries. You're just not going to find it because they didn't do it. And so I do think he is unique in that. And then that has given permission to attention-seeking politicians to and then adopt that type of rhetoric, right, as a way to get on TV, and that's where I guess I'm answering my own question of what's changed is the demonization of your political adversaries, right? To the point where you can't, there isn't any ability. What was it, Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, sitting there in the Rose Garden trying to hash it out to balance the budget and work across the aisle and all that in the 90s. Like that's not even acceptable anymore. And now you've gone for you can't even try to work together, that when something happens to the other side you're laughing about it, and you're making a joke about it. Because I think, and that's where I guess I agree with Brett in that, to me the story when those things were happening there wasn't enough condemnation of that it's not okay to joke about something like that, you know what I mean? And it just was given, people just aired, oh, Trump jokes about Pelosi's husband being attacked, and there's no hey, what are we doing here, guys?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, and I will say something. So I think it started even earlier than that, and this is one of the many things that sort of started me on my path away from the Republican Party and towards a third party. Back when Obama was in office, I started to hear a lot of grumblings from the Republican Party that were leaning that way of they were a lot more veiled than just being out in the open, but it was a lot of we need to get this guy out by any means necessary kind of stuff. And I was like, no, the dude was elected. This is not how we operate the United States of America. That we are not in a banana republic. You need to knock that shit off. But I remember it being a quiet undertone back then, and then by 2016, that's when things really started to just kind of. And I think I know we've been talking about the media a lot, but I think that at the time, the media was so shocked that this guy running for president was just saying these things that they aired it all, right? It was all on TV, all on Twitter. It was all on the news everywhere, right? And so I think they inadvertently played a part in that. They very quickly acclimated the rest of us to that sort of way of talking about your opposition, that it probably did us all a disservice because we began to see that as the new normal.
Yeah, I agree.
Dion, weren't we kind of talking about this beforehand, right? We've just seen this shift in culture in general, where your wife was saying something about people in the DC area seeming like they're more rude these days, right? And you commented they're maybe not as rude as you think, but it probably has progressed. And that's where, again, I think our current state of politics is a reflection of the people in general, is the total populace, that I think as an American people, we are a lot more angry. People are offended constantly. And again, this kind of goes back to the social media thing, or even text messaging, the way that we communicate with people. You no longer have to think about your responses because you can respond immediately, right? So whatever you're feeling, you can just throw it out there. And there's no recourse. There's no recoil for those things. And there's no kind of social checkpoint where if you have a friend standing by you, like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you can't kind of do that stuff. Whereas online, it doesn't matter, right? Because even once you've said it, it's out there and it stays there. And I think that has affected the populace in general, where sadly, we're just more angry and quicker to say stuff like that. And obviously, when we have a president that steps into that as well, because I think our listeners kind of know, like, yes, I am a Republican, but that doesn't mean that I abide by everything that the party has done. And yes, while I voted for Trump, that doesn't mean that I like everything that he does. And that's just kind of the idea that, I can still applaud certain things from flawed individuals. Goes towards both sides. But I think the people really need to do some soul searching and find out, why am I so angry? When I hear something, why does that offend me?
Well,
I think people dig into that.
I think people have been angry forever. It's just thinking, like, I don't think, because I was talking to my dad, and my dad grew up in the segregated South, right? Like, he remembers being when they closed his school and they moved him to a segregated or a desegregated school, and like a white school, and he remembers all of that vividly. And I'm like, do you feel more angry today than you were then? And he was like, no. He was like, I was angry. Once I was angry then, and I've been angry my whole life. You know what I mean? And people were angry then. And so I'm like, well, then why does it feel different now? You know what I mean? And I think it's because
I think it's because
voices
people
are
had time to
amplified.
process things, right? Because
Well,
like, if you got in a fight at school, or if you had bad words with your friend, like, you had to walk home, and by the time you got home, you had a lot of time to think about it. Whereas now you just respond instantly in that feeling, and you have no time to process.
I think it's because no one could hear you be angry. There was no way to amplify your voice back in the day, right? Like, if my dad was sitting in Anderson, South Carolina, where he grew up, and just mad at the world, and as a 19-year-old man, the only people who are going to hear his angry thoughts were the people who are in his small town with him. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't have the ability to connect with others and then hear his anger ricochet back at him from people on online. And I do think, like, it's like a gift and a curse. 40 years ago, we wouldn't be able to have these conversations and amplify our conversations, by by putting out this podcast. But at the same time, people can use the same medium to help, share their anger with others, and to bring them in. And then it like reinforces all the worst things. You know what I mean? And I think that the problem is probably the solution, but we don't know how. It's like we haven't figured out how to engage people more, to pull them out of those bubbles or pull them out of those echo chambers once they're in them. But I do think, yeah, the environment has changed, but I don't believe people are more angry. I think they just have a larger platform to share it, and then have people say, yeah, Mike, and like, they have hype women online, like getting in their head, and then, helping, unfortunately, because the other thing is we've always had mentally ill people. Like, the guy who shot Reagan did it to get Jodie Foster's attention. You know what I mean? Like, these people, there have always been sick people that have engaged in these types of violent acts, but back then. I don't think anybody, I don't think I could tell you what the political leanings of that individual was. And I don't even think people were asking back then. You know what I mean? It was just like, oh my God, somebody tried to kill a president. Like,
So let me ask you this then. I mean, we've been talking about how, things are different now. We've got social media. We can amplify our voices, but I mean, the 60s had plenty of political assassinations and political violence, and, and they didn't have those things. And I'm glad that you brought up, what was it, Hinckley, the Reagan, right? Yeah. Because like 1980, whatever that was like in my mind was like this one-off between like all of the violence of the 60s and then all of the violence that we're seeing today. And like we've been like pendulum swinging that, what is it about today that's apparently similar to what it was in the 60s? But then also, is it really social media amplifying our voices? Or, as Brett, I think you were mentioning earlier, it's lone wolves that it doesn't matter if their voices are amplified or not.
I think what's similar in the 60s to today was the way that the stakes were laid out. And this is where I guess I'll agree as far as the role of the media and the story that's being told at the time. So the 60s, the stakes were very high. You had Vietnam, you had the civil rights movement, you had all these different things happening in the country, and you had these political leaders that very much represented those current issues. And those stories were being fed into people's homes day in and day out. And I do think people knew and understood how high the stakes were. And so this idea that, if the wrong person's in charge, your son, you or yourself maybe get sent to Vietnam, or if the wrong person gets elected, your way of life is going to change depending on which side you fell in the civil rights movement, or all these types of things. So I think then, yeah, it's similar to now, because when you listen to the rhetoric, it's ratcheted up now. Whether it's the same or the stakes are as high now as they were then, I don't know. That's a different discussion. But I do think it gives off that sense of like insecurity on an individual level. Like if this, like it's life or death for me, so I have to act, right? I do think that that's a similarity now to the 60s versus the 80s.
I do remember in ROTC, we talked about in those classes when we were studying military history that the Vietnam War was the first TV war, in that like it was the first time that almost in real time imagery and video and audio from the war zone was being piped into people's houses. And they talked about how that probably got people amped up, right? Because before, when families sent their sons off to World War II, to Korea or whatever, it was, you said goodbye to them, they went away, maybe you saw one or two pictures in the paper or something, but you really didn't know what was going on, especially in real time. And then they came home hopefully alive, but otherwise, in a box. Um and so it was very like compartmentalized and away from the public, whereas with Vietnam it brought it into their living rooms, and so all of a sudden they could see it and they could go, wait a second, I didn't vote for this, this is outrageous, what are we doing? And I wonder if that's a parallel to what we're seeing now with social media, right? We're kind of at another sort of blossoming of a deluge of information being piped into our homes right now, into our pockets, kind of so maybe it's a wave, maybe hopefully we will start to overcome our initial shock and anger at seeing the things that we didn't know were going on before. And once we start to understand, oh, this has always been going on, we just weren't aware of it, maybe that initial anger will subside and we'll be able to calm down like we did back in the 80s. I don't know.
Well, no, I think it's the combination of the stakes are high, which is the feeding, all this information's being pumped out, right? And people are seeing how high the stakes are, and then assigning blame for these things, right? Because I think when you get to political violence, what you get is somebody saying, this bad thing is happening, or this thing I'm afraid of or I'm angry about is happening because of Thea and what Thea's doing, right? And because of politician X, that it's their fault. And so I now need to take action against them, right? Whether it's irrational, I'm not trying to say it makes sense, but like I'm oversimplifying how we get to, I'm going to go then kill elected officials in Minnesota. I'm going to shoot Gabby Giffords, right? And that's, it's that combination, and I don't know if you can't I'm going to I'm going to mess up an analogy, but you can't put it back in the box, right? Like you can't, it's already out. And so then it becomes like, how do we get people before they get to the point where they think their only recourse is political violence?
Well, and like all four of us coming from a military background, right? There's a theory of international relations about Thucydides' trap, about how one power is rising, another power is declining, and usually the power that is declining, that's being passed by the other power, strikes out, and this ends up leading to war. And I feel like in the 60s, it was essentially white backlash to the civil rights movement, that people are seeing their own power or whatever being kind of taken away or eroded or whatever. So they're gonna lash out. I see some like very similar to today that they feel like the other side is gaining power at their expense, and therefore they're going to lash out before the other side gets too much power.
Yeah, or this belief. I think this is where, again, we're coming back to the whole social media, where a misbelief or like so I'll use Jewish people, right? Name your awful stereotype about Jewish people. I still think that part of that is, then you get in these bubbles on social media where someone kind of falls into this group and you have everybody repeating these terrible thoughts. And now someone's like, well, you know what, then I need to do something about it. And they're now, committing acts of violence against Jewish individuals in public. Because that was 2 weeks ago. Those young couple from the Israeli embassy, and it's, so that's where, and I always hate the whole both sides, but that's where I will say, like, being very careful, like on the left, I'm always very, very careful about how I speak about my objections to Gaza, right? And I'm always very thoughtful in my words in saying the government of Israel, the Netanyahu administration. I criticize it in the same way I criticize the current administration and our government, but I'm very careful to then not just label Israel as a problem, because I see a lot of people online just Israel this, but it's like, well, you can say the same thing about America, but we have divisions within our nation, and everything that happens doesn't represent each of us as an individual. And because Israel's a nation state and it has, the strong ties to Judaism, then you can't say every Jewish person represents the same thing that government represents. And you know what I mean? But you see those conversations happening, and I just feel like that's where this danger is, or where what we're seeing happen. And I don't know. I'm very disheartened by this issue because I don't think it's changing. You know what I mean? And I actually think the solution is to talk to more people and hear more perspectives and recognize that it's not always what you think, that you may not have the full picture, or the problem may not be as amplified as you think it is. But I don't think that our current state of, our current culture allows for that.
Yeah, Thea, I'd agree. There's a couple things that you said there that are really important. Like the whole idea of the echo chamber, right? People hearing the information and then thinking about it, mulling it over, just that constant processing of information. I always heard it said like this, like, if you think about getting an ice cream sundae long enough, you're going to end up with one, right? Like if you put enough thought into it, you're going to keep thinking about it and keep thinking about it. Eventually you're like, I'm going to have an ice cream sundae, right? It's just, you start moving that direction, whether it's something you really wanted at the start or not. You put enough focus on it, you get it. And I think we see that starting to happen. People aren't policing their thoughts. And that was the second part of what you said, I think was really important, is you're actually careful to think about what you speak. And I think a lot of people aren't. They just throw out there whatever they're feeling, regardless of what impacts it could have. I don't think people take enough time to actually police their thoughts and actually think about what they think about.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that helps, and here's where I don't often give credit to these people, but like Nancy Pelosi came out after Trump was shot and on public television said, we are glad that he is safe and okay. And, this was a terrible act and we do not condone political violence, even if it is against our rivals, that kind of thing. Now, Nancy Pelosi did also liken him to Hitler before, too. So, but they, even if the American public can tell that there isn't a lot of heart behind those statements, it is important that those people get out in front of the cameras and make those statements. It helps to tamp down the flames after an incident like that. And I think if both sides would do that more often, like get out on camera and say, you know what, we have our disagreements, but this is not the answer. Like this is not acceptable. It would just help overall like lower the temperature in the room.
I also think, not beyond that, not just when something bad happens. One thing I remember, there's a clip of John McCain from years ago when he was running for president. I think, Will, you know what I'm about to say, where this woman gets up and starts talking about Muslims and, just terrible language that she's using, and he corrects her. And he basically is like, no, that's not correct. Like he scolds her to a certain extent. And I think that's something we don't see enough of, right? When someone, you can disagree. I mean, this is the premise of our podcast. You can fundamentally disagree with where somebody is coming from and not talk about that person like they're inhuman, they're not a patriot, they're an enemy. You can engage in the conversation and give them credit for. So again, I'll use my side. I vehemently support the rights of trans people to live and exist in this country. But I don't need to call someone a bigot that doesn't have the same understanding of it as I do, right? Like, I don't need to use that language. I don't need to just like cut that person down and they're evil, they're terrible because look, they're not supporting trans people. And it's like, you got to meet people where they are. But when you start calling them a bigot and you call them these terrible things and you put them down, then it gets your side riled up to just see that other person, that other side is the enemy, and then that person who you've called a bigot, they're not going to talk to you. They're not going to try to explain their perspective. They're not going to engage with you because you just call them a bigot. Do you know what I mean? Like it and so it's like, and how does that tie to political violence? Once you've labeled somebody the enemy, and like, I don't remember who said it earlier today, but you've dehumanized them, then it makes it easier to take that jump that they deserve what they're getting. You know what I mean? They deserve the violence.
So it's kind of the thought, like, if you ever watch any like big action movies or sci-fi movies, or you take Star Wars, right? The stormtroopers, there's a reason that the big bad's goons always wear helmets that you can't see their face.
Yes.
Because they dehumanize them so that when they're taken out by the good guy, you don't feel bad about it.
Exactly.
Right? So having that human element is really what's important. And yeah, I was one that mentioned that before, is that we're getting to the point where we're just dehumanizing people, and we get away from that value of life, and that leads it to where, this violence is okay because it supports my cause, and those aren't real people anyway.
Yeah. Or they deserved it.
Let me ask you guys this, because this came up. Somebody brought up this point this past week, and it kind of made me think about the us versus them divide. But if you see a car on the street, any car, and it's got an American flag on it, do you make assumptions about that person's political party?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like, I started thinking about that because we all do. I think any of our listeners, viewers, all four of us, if we saw like a big American flag magnet or sticker, or an American, an actual cloth flag sticking up out of somebody's car, we would automatically assume that person is a Republican. Yeah. And I think that says something, right? It kind of says, one, if you are a Republican, I think that not only do you view the Democrats as the enemy, but they're un-American, right? Like they're not even for this country, so they truly are the enemy, and that's bad. But how did Democrats get into this position, right? Because it's weird that the Democrat Party wouldn't be proud to be an American in that way. You know what I mean?
I think that we saw in the wake of 9/11 and then the subsequent wars, the global war on terror, when the Democratic Party finally kind of openly became, against these wars, or became critical of the wars, and that became part of our platform, I think that's when you saw the co-option of patriotism, because the argument on the other side was, well, we need to do this to keep America safe, to support America, and to not to have the opposite view is un-American, right? And that's where I started to see the use of being what it meant to be a patriot somehow meant that you had to support these wars, right? And to not do so, that made you un-American or unpatriotic. And I had a real struggle during this time because obviously I was on active duty, and I questioned the wars while I was sitting in Afghanistan. I'm still, you know what I mean? I'm like sitting there looking around like, what are we doing, right? And I remember there were so many times in the military that I had like very light conversations where it was very clear that if I even asked the wrong question, people would look at me and were very, very critical of, why would you even say that? Why would you even ask that? And aren't you a captain? Aren't you a lieutenant or whatever rank I was at the time? And I'd be like, well, yeah, I'm not saying I'm not going to do my duty, but I think it's our job as Americans to question this. So at least I personally witnessed that change during that time. And when you saw Islamophobia really kind of starting to balloon a little bit in America. If you stood up for Muslims, you were standing up for terrorists, and that's un-American, or and I don't think we've ever gotten away from that. And that go on. Well,
yeah, the reason that it took on as strongly as it did is, I mean, even historically, Democrats, anti-war folks were the flag burners during Vietnam. Trump hugs the American flag on stage. People are printing Trump's face on the American flag, which is against U.S. code. Like, there's been so many things that kind of not only has it followed historically, but
Kaepernick. Right. Kaepernick is another one, right?
Kaepernick taking a knee during the national anthem.
Yeah. So I think you're right. You're right, Dion, that kind of, I think that kind of that's how that conversation started, and it's been ratcheted up. But you're absolutely right. If I see an American flag on a car, especially on a truck,
I was going to say, you don't have to go American flag. Like, if you've got a big like F-150, you're a Republican.
I won't say that, because people would think that about me. I drive a Jeep Wrangler, and like, I think there's times when I get out of my Jeep and people are like, "You're getting out of that Jeep," like I'm kind of stepping down,
That's the point. Yeah. Just because people have an American flag doesn't necessarily mean that they're a Republican or a Democrat. Just because they have a truck doesn't mean that they're
exactly. I would like to see I feel like the Democrat Party really should re-embrace America, right? And just say, look, the fight's not over, right? Like, this country is not perfect. We haven't achieved paradise or utopia or whatever we're trying to do, but it still is a great country, and we love it. And and I feel like that message unfortunately plays into the other side viewing the Democrats as, hey, you guys are unpatriotic. You guys are the enemy.
But Dion, I would argue. So you said that you would like to see the Democrat Party
just re-embrace that patriotism.
Re-embrace. That's what it was. What makes you think we ever stopped embracing it? Like, that's like, I think how we express it is very different. But like, I don't think the Democratic Party has stopped embracing America.
It goes back to what we talked about in the last episode of this narrow definition of what it means to be American, right? And so these symbols of driving a big truck and, because ironically, a couple years ago, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, driving a Tesla was like seen as a liberal, flex, right? A progressive flex. And yet Tesla was always an American-made car, right? In the cutting edge of technology, right? But that was seen as a flex as being liberal. Now, of course, it's the opposite. The same people are struggling with those cars. But it, again, it's co-opted the culture, like what these symbols mean in the culture. You know what I mean? Because I agree with Will. I don't think that anything that Democrats have done isn't American, because to be American is to be free, right? That's 4th of July just happened, right?
I think here's what I think happened, and you could let me know if my perception of it is wrong. But I think, like you said, Thea, especially since George W. Bush was the president when 9/11 happened, the wars were kicked off by him and his administration, and so it became sort of de facto Republican patriotism. We're gonna hug the flag. We're gonna, America, fuck yeah, and that kind of got associated with Republicans. I think at whatever time the Democrats decided to sort of distance themselves from the war messaging, they probably subconsciously also distanced themselves from the overt ties of that messaging to like American patriotism, right? So
I
for
agree.
instance, like as soon as Donald Trump, I know I'm jumping forward in the future here, but for instance, as soon as Donald Trump was on stage hugging the American flag, I'm pretty sure any Democrat candidate was like, well, I'm not going to do that because that is now associated with Donald Trump and the Republicans, and I don't want to be seen to associate with that. And so I think there was probably this subconscious detachment from those sort of overt patriotic
Well, I think
displays.
that I think this is also part of the authenticity issue on the side of the Democratic Party, right? Where for a long time, I think our candidates, they made their story about how they were different, right? Like, instead of making their story about how they connect and are American, right? And I use the example of like, you know, Kamala Harris, a lot of her story was the daughter of immigrants, grew up in Oakland, and she kind of struggled with kind of like, you know, making her story about like what is about your story that makes you American, like makes you proud to be an American, right? Like what is it about you that makes you love this country, that makes you believe in this country, not just that you came from somewhere else and succeeded as an individual, but what made you part of the larger American story. And I think actually Barack Obama did a better job of going to rural Illinois and like sitting there and being in diners and getting to know people and learning how to tell the American story and talk about his grandparents from Kansas and talk about his mom and growing up in Hawaii, and he was better at like saying, yes, my name is Barack Hussein Obama, but I love America and here's why, or here's the things about America. He talked about the promise of America, about us living up to the words in the Declaration of Independence, right? I think that was one thing I always admired about the way that he spoke about what it meant to be American, because I could identify with that. But I think so could a lot of people, which is why he got elected, right? So could the Bretts of the world and the Deons of the world and the Wills, like to say, I love America, or here's what's great about our country. I think the Democratic Party got away from that. And I think the more we've gotten away from actually speaking positively about America and not just focusing on where we fall short, we've lost a lot. We've lost that connection with a lot of voters, right? And we've also lost, then that makes it easy for us to be labeled as the enemy and, all
Yeah.
these bad things.
So there was actually a
Yeah.
really good article that came out the other day that I was reading. I don't know if any of you know who Patrick Lencioni is. He's a phenomenal author. He's got a lot of great books out there in terms of teamwork and values and things like that. But he wrote an article that was, "Can we still agree on American core values?" I think it's worth a read. Now, I know my Democrat friends will probably roll their eyes at the source that it's posted on, because it is on the Daily Wire. It just happens to be where it's posted. But the article itself, it's very nonpartisan, and I love that. And just where he talks about what makes us American, what core values do we need to stand upon. I think it's a great place for people to look at that, because I think that's where this whole conversation has kind of taken us when we look at this political violence. Is we've really stoked this fire of us versus them. It's that American versus un-American, and we see it kind of on both sides. It's like, well, are we the America of the future, or are we the America of the past? There's a lot of those things that play in, whereas again, this is part of that conversation we had last time, is what are the core values of America? And I think people need to kind of take time and look at that. Anyway, I know we are just over an hour. So I don't want to necessarily spin up a whole lot of things again. We always have great topics that we can dive into and, pull off of this, but I think we're probably at a good spot where we can start to wrap this up. One of the things that I was going to mention kind of real quick, though, when we're just coming to an end point. Sorry, I had this written down and I forgot to pull it up, but I think what this is really going to kind of come down to, guys, is if we want to get to a point where we have a future without political violence, we've got to be consistent, right? And that means calling out all violent extremists. It doesn't matter what side they're on. It doesn't matter if they vote like us. It gets to the point where we actually need courage and not partisanship in order to preserve this republic. And so I think coming back to that point of talking about American values is something that I think people should spend a few minutes actually thinking about and spending time on. What do you actually believe? What makes America America? And finding those things that we can agree on, and then use that as our foundation to continue to build. But on that note, let's go ahead and go around the room. Let's talk about what's making us happy this last week. Will, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah. All right. So it was 4th of July the other day, and we took a family vacation to New York City. So we spent the 4th in New York City. We went to Ellis Island, Liberty Island. I don't know, New York City just kind of seems like one of those, like that's what America's all about. Right. And so it was just it was nice to be in that environment. I was telling Brett and Dion before we got on the air that, we didn't want to, with our 12-year-old, we didn't want to be down in like Times Square or any of those kind of places. So we did watch the fireworks from the air conditioning of our hotel room. But just the overall trip, spending time with family in New York City, it was the first time my daughter saw a Statue of Liberty, that sort of thing. So it was a cool experience to kind of be there for the 4th.
Very cool. Dion?
Well, so yesterday was our 11th anniversary, me and my wife. And so it was a very low key day. We went to the pool. Like we just enjoyed the weather. We didn't do anything all that extravagant or anything. I'm terrible at holding on to gifts. So I gave her anniversary gift like 3 months ago because I start shopping early, and then I happened to find what I wanted to get her. She's been doing sourdough bread and a lot of baking and stuff, so I got her a customized branding iron for her baked goods, so she can like brand it with her little initials and stuff. And then she got me this awesome levitating pen with like a meteorite, made from like a meteorite or something. But it just we were talking to each other, and we both had the feeling of, on the one hand, how has it already been 11 years? Like, it doesn't feel like it's been that long at all. But on the other hand, like, it's almost like we can't remember life before we got married. It feels like it's always been this way, and it always should be this way. And it's a great place to be in this relationship where we've got each other's backs, and we're partners, and we're a team, and it's awesome. I love it.
Well, very cool. Well, Thea, I don't know if you're still there. Your video cut out.
Uh-oh.
So while we're waiting for her to get back, I'll go ahead and throw mine in here then. So for me, what I'm actually excited about, what's making me happy, is I get to finally do my Father's Day gift tomorrow. We've just had some scheduling conflicts and stuff, but my wife, Sarah, she scheduled me a gravity spa appointment. So it's a like deprivation chamber, go in like the super buoyant water and just float for a while. But then it's also coupled with it's some sort of like Thai stretching, like assisted stretching massage type thing, which I'm excited about because I've been doing a lot more workouts and stuff lately. And so muscles have been tight and sore. And so I don't know, I'm just excited to just go relax for a little bit and experience this, because they're both two things I've never done before. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. So cool. Thea, are you back with us now?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me? I don't know. Technology turned on me. So I guess it's my turn. Sorry. I guess, yeah, I'll go with 4th of July. What's making me happy? Summer is my favorite time of the year. And 4th of July, I got to reconnect with friends and spend it with some of my close friends and go over to their house and watch the fireworks. She had one of those neighborhoods. So I'll do a shout out to the OC. Like LA can be extreme with fireworks. Dion, I don't know if you experienced this when you lived here, but like central LA will look like, I mean, just crazy. Any excuse to shoot up fireworks, they will. But as a result of that, there's also a lot of times a crackdown on how many fireworks get set off, and the police are out, and it's like a whole thing. So like you're kind of afraid to set them off in your neighborhood because you don't know if the cops are going to come. And so I think this year with ICE and all of that, I was just like, I don't know if I want to be in LA. So anyway, we decided to go down to Orange County to a good friend of mine's house, and we had a great time. And then her neighborhood, oh my goodness, like it was like A+ fireworks. We were like, I don't know if these people went to Mexico to get these fireworks. Like, I mean, I don't know if they stole them from Disneyland, but they were popping off like real fireworks in the neighborhood, like across the street. I was like, one of her neighbors had to set off like $10,000 worth of fireworks. So I was like, I don't know how you afford that. You know what I mean? Like, but it was really cool. So that was making me happy, just enjoying 4th of July with my friends and my kids. And it was, and I took my mom sat there and enjoyed it. So it was a good time.
That's awesome. Thea, I can attest to personal experience that Mexico does have some fantastic fireworks. I grew up in Tucson, so we were 45 minutes from the border. So there might have been a few excursions in order to do so.
And just so our listeners know, Dion says that we should get rid of all fireworks for fiscal responsibility and trade it in for.
See,
okay, so
you're playing the political game by taking my quote out of context.
You trade it for one F-35, right? That's what you said.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, well, very cool, everyone. Thanks for tuning into our podcast this week. Again, please like, subscribe, share with your friends. We want to get this out there. We want to show the world that we can actually have civil conversation and talk through these things. We don't always get to solutions, but we at least hope that our discussions can, or that our disagreements can help you with your decisions. And so please keep tuning into our discussions. We hope that you guys like these. Please comment. Let us know what you think about this. We'd love to address some of those. And then we'll be back next time with our next topic, which we have not decided on yet. So thank you all. Have a great night.
Night.